argue that price, then I'm bargaining. If it's a fixed price, and there's a sign that says all prices are as marked, then there's no room for bargaining. That's called fixed price. You can't bargain a fixed price. Okay? That makes sense? So, if even though the items may be priced, it's usually understood that you can bargain to get a better price. So the price that's marked is usually the starting point, okay, and you're going to try to go down. The price that's marked on an item in a store, that we're, like a Gold Souk where you can bargain, that price is the highest price the owner expects to get. Anything under that is bargain. Okay? Make sense?
Would it be fair to say, I'm sorry, I'm not a student.
Oh, then you're not allowed to ask a question. No, go ahead.
I don't want to ask a question.
That's okay.
Would it be fair to say that a bargaining would be more of an involvement of one stakeholder of the two parties, in the sense where if I am, arguing about this price, I'm actually bargaining, but I'm not negotiating in the full sense, because it's one party trying to reach for his best interest, which is really not the best interest of the other party. While negotiation is like both are trying to reach a mutual consent.
Well, yeah, but even in bargaining, it's not all one-sided. If I go into a Gold Souk to buy a ring, the owner is going to try to stay with that fixed price. I'm going to try to get it down. So it still becomes a negotiation process.
So
it's how much am I, as the owner of the store, how much am I willing to come down?
Should I say I bargained and I took it for a cheaper price, or I negotiated and I...
Well, you can say either. They're almost interchangeable. You negotiate, you bargain. It's really, it's kind of the same thing. The negotiation encompasses the whole atmosphere. Your plan of going in there, your plan of attack, how much you want to pay for it. That's part of the negotiation process. Once you get in there and start, if you will, dickering with the owner, now you're in the bargaining process of negotiation. But there's more to negotiation than just bargaining. There's the preliminary, we're going to learn later. There's framing, there's commitment. After you've agreed to something, how do you stick to the commitment of that? That's all part of the negotiation process. The bargaining is actually the arguing back and forth, reaching the agreement. That's the bargaining piece. Make sense?
Yes.
So, distributive bargaining is basically called competitive or win-lose. Okay? Distributive bargaining is about, as I mentioned earlier, winning. I don't care if the other person becomes demoralized. I don't care if the other person doesn't get what they're looking for. As long as I win, that's the main frame of distributive bargaining. Got it? All of you who aren't here? So, the goal of one party is usually in fundamental and direct conflict with the goals of the other party. They want the highest price, I want to pay the lowest price. We are fundamentally opposed. If I'm buying software from a software company and I'm the procurement manager, even though it's not directly affecting me, I'm bargaining on behalf of my company, it's the same thing. I want to pay the least amount of money, they want me to pay the most. Okay? I want it to be done in the shortest time frame for delivery, they want to extend the time frame. I want the best maintenance and follow-up agreement, they want the least maintenance agreement. Okay? So we are fundamentally opposed to each other. Okay? Resources in distributive bargaining are fixed and limited. Both parties want to maximize their share of the outcome. So, and by the way, this is referred to, and you're going to see this over and over, but I want you to remember one term here. We talk about a fixed resource. That means you can't make it any bigger, you can't make it any more attractive. It is what it is. That's called, in negotiation, the fixed pie. Everybody knows what a pie is?
Yeah, apple pie.
An apple pie. Very good.
Okay.
It's a fixed pie. This is distributive bargaining. So the pie is only one size. I can't enlarge it. It's one size only. For every piece I give away to my opponent, that's less for me. So my goal is to keep as much of that fixed pie as possible. If I'm negotiating with an employee who's looking for a raise, it's the exact same thing. My budget is my fixed pie. Okay? I only have so much in my budget. Every time I give an employee more money, that takes away from my fixed pie, my budget. Make sense?
Yeah.
You sure? Well, it doesn't matter with you. You're not a student.
I mean, you're just talking directly to my tummy here, so
Oh,
I
okay.
can fully understand.
Good. So, I want you to remember the term fixed pie. Fixed pie is always a piece, if you want to use the word piece, of the distributive bargaining process. Okay? When we get into integrative, you no longer have a fixed pie. Now the pie becomes enlarged. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Distributive bargaining is common but considered not a good option when maintaining a long-term relationship is a desired result. So, what they're saying here, if you're in a win-lose bargaining situation, you're the winner, the other person's going to be the loser. You know, every time you go into a relationship with that person and it becomes a win-lose scenario, you are not going to maintain a long-term relationship. Think of it again. A procurement person in a company who has to deal regularly with the same vendor, all right? If they're always beating the vendor to death to get the lowest price, over a period of time, that relationship is not going to be very good because the vendor's always going to think, oh, every time I got a bargain with this guy, I come out the loser because I need the business. So the relationship there is not something that's going to be sustained. Does that make sense? So the idea is in a distributive bargaining relationship, it's usually going to be a short-term relationship. In an integrative bargaining relationship, it usually is, since it's win-win, you keep that relationship alive for a longer period of time. So if I go into the Gold Souk and I'm going to beat the man to death over the price I'm going to pay for his ring, I don't care about a long-term relationship. I'm probably never going to see this guy again. So distributive bargaining is my best alternative. Make sense? Okay. So, this, now you don't have to do this on your exam, but on your multiple choice you might see the word ZOPA, which is what? It's the zone of possible agreement. I didn't make the word up. It's a real negotiation word. It's called ZOPA. Okay? The zone of possible agreement. So the example we have here, you have the buyer here, the seller there, and we're buying a used car. Simple? Okay. So, the preferred asking price of the car is right around $21,500, close to $22,000. Okay? That's like the sticker price, the preferred price. Now, the seller knows that they're going to ask a higher price, but they're probably going to have to settle lower than that through the bargaining process. So that's the sticker price. I know I'm going to have to come down. So the preferred seller price or target point is right in here, just over $18,000. That's my must-have. Got it? Okay. Now the buyer, their preferred price is way down here. That's their target point. And they know in reality they're not going to get the car that low. They're going to have to come up higher. So, the seller knows he has to come down. The buyer knows he has to come up. So, therefore, the green area becomes the zone of possible agreement. Make sense? Everybody got that? Okay. And that's where you bargain. Okay? So you give a little, you get a little, you come up, you go down. So basically the whole idea of the ZOPA is to find, if you want to, another good word for this would be common ground, okay? Something that's acceptable, a zone, an area of money that's going to be acceptable to both the seller and the buyer. So again, the seller has to come down, the buyer may have to come up, and then you get into the zone of agreement, okay? It's a very simple model. And they call it the ZOPA, Zone of Possible Agreement. Just remember that, because you might see that on your multiple choice. You might get one multiple choice question like that, okay? Everybody got it? See now, if you didn't come back on time, you missed it, now you're out of luck. So, it took me a lot longer to put this slide together than it did to explain it. Okay? Everybody got that? Yes. I mean, this is common sense. I mean, you buy a car, you want to pay the lowest, and the seller wants to get the most. So you know, one's coming up and one's going down, and then eventually you get to the zone of agreement. So somewhere in here, usually somewhere in this area, this is acceptable to the buyer, this is the seller's tolerance limit. So if that's acceptable and this is as low as the seller's going to go, it's going to be somewhere between this red line and this red line. That's what they're finally going to settle on. Okay?
I think it gets more interesting when the buyer highs up the price and gives you the illusion of what is tolerant.
Yes, and that is a common tactic.
Yeah.
So the seller, there's two things. The seller sets an unreasonably high price because he feels that way, if the buyer gets the seller to come down a little bit, the car may still be too high, but the seller will think, well, gee, I got him from here to here. That's a trick. Just like sometimes the buyer will come in with a real lowball number, so that if the seller gets that price up a little higher, they think they're coming away with a good deal, but they're really not. So yeah, those are tricks. So those are called tactics. But if you set the price too high, or in an opening bid you come in too low, you basically negate the trust factor in the negotiation. Okay. I mean, if I come in and I say, well, my price really here is $30,000. I mean, the car isn't even worth that much. Okay. So that would be an unreasonable type of, that's not negotiating in what we call good faith. Okay. But you're right. People will do that.
It happens usually in touristic areas, right?
Yeah.
They're not familiar at all with the prices.
Oh yeah, it's exactly right. So the seller takes advantage of the buyer's ignorance. These are all tactics, okay? So if you have somebody shows up to buy your car and you immediately size them up and say, oh, this guy doesn't really know the market. Now my price just went up a little higher, okay? Make sense? This one you also need to know. Anybody ever hear of a BATNA? You can't take a negotiation course and not learn about BATNA. BATNA is simply an abbreviation for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's called a BATNA. Very common in any negotiation course you take. I learned about it when I took a negotiation course in graduate school. That was the first thing we learned was the BATNA. Silly name, but it simply means the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which means if you're arguing over a price, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, okay, and you can't really reach an agreement, your BATNA as the buyer and the seller is, another word for a BATNA is plan B. If I can't get the price I want, this is my best alternative, okay? Make sense? That's a BATNA. You should always have a plan B anytime you're going into any kind of a negotiation. So if I'm bargaining and I can't get my goal, what's the next best scenario for me? And the next best scenario may be just walking away. Okay? But you have to decide that in advance. Okay? So, a BATNA is the alternative action that will be taken should your proposed agreement with another party result in an unsatisfactory agreement or when an agreement fails to materialize. So if I can't get my best case scenario, which would be my BATNA, then I may actually walk away from the deal completely. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. So if the potential results of a current negotiation only offers a value that is less than one's BATNA, there is no point in proceeding with the negotiation. One should use their best available alternative option instead, which is maybe just walking away from the deal. Okay? So if you want to pay $22,000, the highest you're going to go on a car is $22,000, let's say. Okay? All right? Your BATNA may be 21, and that's it. If the seller is not going to go down to 21, then they're not going to meet your best alternative, then the only other alternative you have is to walk away from the deal. It's just not the right deal for you. There's no shame in walking away from a negotiated agreement if you can't get to where you need to be. In fact, if you don't, you may come out a loser. Okay? Everybody got that? So, BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. I can't get the price I want, so my BATNA is I either take a little less or I walk away completely. All right. Prior to the start, each party should have ascertained their own individual BATNA. So, this is not something you start when you negotiate. You have to know what your BATNA is before you walk into a negotiation. Okay? Even if the procurement person against the software vendor, both of those people should have their own BATNAs. What is my best alternative here? All right? Because once you're in the negotiations, it's too late to try to come up with a BATNA. It's too late. You need to know, in other words, you need to have a bottom. What's my bottom? Okay? So, the strategic importance. One of the determinants of your power in a negotiation is the attractiveness of your BATNA as compared to the proposals made during the discussions. The more attractive your BATNA is compared with the proposals you receive, the more power you have in the negotiation. So if you have a good backup plan, a good plan B, that actually gives you more bargaining power. Okay? Because if your plan eventually is, if I don't get this, I'm going to walk away, and you're committed to walking away, that gives you leverage to bargain. Okay? If it's something you can't live without, and you have to reach an agreement, then you're losing leverage. Same thing with the seller. If a seller has to sell something, if I'm selling my house because I'm being transferred out of the city, I have to sell my house, I lose leveraging power. And the buyer will know that. If the buyer knows, hey, this guy's being transferred in 2 weeks, I have leverage to get them even lower, okay? I'm gaining leverage, they're losing leverage. Does that make sense? And always think of negotiation as a buying and selling scenario. If you're applying for a job, you go in on a job interview, right? Who's the buyer? Who's the seller? The employer is the buyer. The job candidate is the seller. You're selling yourself. They're buying. Okay? So most negotiations, if you kind of derive it into a buy and sell, it's much easier to understand that way. Okay? So, the less attractive your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is compared with the proposals, the less power you have. Okay? Since there is a direct relationship between negotiating power and a good BATNA, it is important to improve your BATNA whenever possible. So you have to give it a lot of thought. What is my best alternative if I can't reach a good negotiated agreement? Walk away or get the best price I can get? You have to decide that in advance.
The psychology plays a big role.
Oh, big role. Yeah.
Personal skills as well.
Exactly, because what happens is this. Good negotiators, believe it or not, are not born. This comes with experience. Okay? When you start negotiating, the more negotiating you do, the better you get. You look at somebody that, particularly in purchasing or procurement, people that have been doing it for a number of years are a whole lot better than somebody who's only been in the field a year or two. It is. It's something you develop, and it is. There's psychology here. There's knowing how to bluff people. okay? All the different tactics you
It
use.
shows sincerity as well,
Yeah, well,
Sometimes,
sincere, yeah,
you
some,
don't have to play around with them because some people are really smart and they can, catch you. And
well, that's
you
true.
lose the trust. So
Yeah, but see, you have to,
be
that's why you have to know the
sincere.
person, you have to size up the person you're negotiating with. How smart are they versus how smart are you? Okay? And if you're negotiating with someone that has more knowledge than you, then there's different tactics you may have to use. Otherwise, the person who's more experienced is going to have more leverage. Okay? And by the way, leverage is a common negotiating term. Leverage means the balance of power. Okay? And the balance of power or leverage can shift back and forth through the negotiation. It doesn't always stay with one person. Okay? So, some of the positions that are taken during negotiations, obviously you have an opening offer, then you have an opening stance, you make initial concessions, you develop a pattern of concession making, and then you get into the final offer phase. Okay? That's really what negotiations is. Each party makes an opening offer. This is what I want to pay, and the other party says, this is what I want to sell it for. That's your opening offer. And he's up here and you're down here. Now you have to bring it closer. So, your opening stance, well, I don't want to give too much. I'm going to take a harder approach, or you may take a softer approach. It just depends. It depends on the negotiation itself. Then you start making concessions, okay, and so on. So taking each one, opening offer, making the first opening offer can sometimes be an advantage as long as the negotiator is confident and well prepared. So if you're very confident, and let's say you're buying a car, a used car particularly, you may want to take the advantage of making the opening offer, right? And you may lowball that person as well. Lowball means you come in really low with the offer. If you're very confident in your negotiation skills, it's better to make an opening offer, opening statement. If you're not as confident, then you may want to let the other person, the other negotiator, take the lead. Okay.
What if what you propose is higher than what is proposing? Then you are at a losing point, yeah?
That's always a chance you can take, yeah. So rarely is that going to happen. It could happen. You know where you might find that happen? When you're negotiating a big cost item like a home. You may really want this home, so you throw an offer out there, and the offer you make may have been the same or higher than what the seller was willing to sell it for. Now you've kind of lost a lot of leverage. That's the way the deals work, though. Okay? That's why you have to do your research. Planning and researching before you go into negotiation is critical. And the bigger the item you're negotiating, the more research you better do, particularly if you're buying a home. Okay? So, an exaggerated opening offer is advantageous because it gives the negotiator room for movement and creates an impression in the mind of the other negotiator that there's a long way to go before a reasonable agreement is reached. More concessions than they originally had planned to make may need to be made, and the original tolerance limit may need to be adjusted. So there can be advantages to making the opening offer and coming in way lower than what the other party was looking for. Disadvantages of making an exaggerated opening offer: it may be immediately rejected, and then the negotiation could end prematurely. Or it can communicate that you have an attitude of toughness and inflexibility that may damage long-term relationships. So there are upsides and downsides to everything. Negotiation, again, it's a game. Okay? It's kind of a risk analysis. You have to look at the risk. You have to look at the party you're negotiating with. Can I outsmart my opponent? Okay? Got it? Opening stance. The specific attitude a negotiator will use during the negotiation. So, You may decide to be very competitive, fight to get the best on every point of the negotiation, or you may decide to be moderate, take a moderate stance where you're more willing to make concessions and compromise, or, my favorite, maybe you want to be belligerent. Maybe that's your opening stance. Attack positions, offers, and character of the other negotiator. Well, if you really knew what you were talking about, we could probably have a serious negotiation. Okay? That's being belligerent, attacking the other negotiator. And that's a tactic. Or you may be understanding. Well, you know, I really understand where you're coming from, but I think you really need to look at my point of view. And, you know, you're kind of more compromising. So all of these are opening stances. So you're either competitive, you're moderately competitive, you're belligerent, or you can be understanding. These are all the different tactics you have to decide what you're going to take. And a lot of it depends on what you're negotiating, what your BATNA is, and your sizing up of your opponent. Okay? What do you think? You got it? The tendency for opponents to respond in kind to the distributive tactics of the other negotiator. That's another issue. So, if you're belligerent, then the other party's probably going to be belligerent too. Okay? If you're more compromising and understanding, then they may be more compromising. And so everything you do is risk. Okay? So if you're going to take a belligerent opening stance, then you're going to have to be able to handle similar attitude coming back at you.
It depends on your situation that you are in also.
Absolutely. Every negotiation is different. It depends on the personality of the two parties. It depends on the items, or whatever you are negotiating. It also depends on how badly you need to do the deal and how badly they need to do the deal. So this is, you know, and it's not an exact science. As I said, it's more of a game than a science. It's like playing chess. You know, if you play chess with someone who's inexperienced, you know, you make a few moves, boom, checkmate. But if you're playing with somebody who's very experienced, you may have to change your strategy. Okay? It's the same thing with this. It's no different. How about concessions? Making concessions are the central approach to negotiation. Concessions are giving in to certain points. People enter negotiations expecting concessions. So when I walk into the Gold Souk, and they have a ring there, and it's so much whatever, so many dollars for this ring. Does the owner expect to make some concessions from the price that's marked? Yeah, that's the whole deal. Okay, but there may be some people who walk into a Gold Souk like a tourist and look at the ring and say, "Gee, that's a pretty good price. We'll pay that." Okay, but there are other people who come in and just assume they're going to negotiate everything, and the souk owner realizes that. They're ready to negotiate. They're ready to make concessions when needed. Their BATNA, in essence, is to make the sale, even if they have to come down. Because they know that for every one I have to negotiate down, that I negotiate down, there's going to be a tourist who's going to come in and pay. They're stupid usually. They pay full price. Right? What? Go ahead.
With this concessions, does it have to do anything with some origin of the person? There's some kind of, some regions in the world. Some people, they are open to, negotiate something. Some guys are cut off. They say, well, I pay them. Does it have any kind of relation with their attitude or where they came from, the background?
It can be. It's, like I said, you have to see how the negotiation, it really depends on how desperate you are to do a deal. So if I'm buying something, making a concession is paying more. If I'm selling something, making a concession is selling it for less. If I'm buying a car, it's not always about price. Some of the concessions the car dealer makes is, well, if you pay this price, we'll give you the oversized tires. or we'll give you a longer maintenance agreement. Those are concessions.
I think he's talking maybe about heritage of certain populations.
Oh, you mean culture?
Culture-wise. I mean, if you, let's say, for example, Lebanese. If you talk about a Lebanese person, you say, wow, these people are negotiators because their heritage comes from the Phoenicians where they used to trade and they had to bargain. If you go to European people, for instance,
Yeah.
because their culture is you should pay the price as it is stipulated, then they go ahead and
Yeah,
pay
well,
for the
culture, culture will play a big piece of this, but we'll see that when we talk about international negotiations. That's where we bring out the cultural aspects, okay? So yes, the answer would be yes, culture does play a lot in this. I don't know if I want to go back in ancient history to the Phoenicians when I'm sitting down and negotiate with somebody, you know, but I mean, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, if you're from, you know, if you're from the United States, your methodology of negotiation is going to be much different if you are negotiating something in Japan. You have to. If you don't adjust to the culture of Japan to do your negotiations, you're going to be in trouble, and vice versa. Okay, so yes, culture plays a big piece in this. Okay, which is why if I represent a company in the U.S. and I have to go to Japan to negotiate a contract for my company, rather than have somebody from my company go in and fumble all over the thing, I'm probably better off hiring somebody in Japan who's familiar with the culture to negotiate on my behalf. Then I eliminate that cultural process. Okay? But yeah, that's a good question. Negotiators are actually less satisfied when negotiations conclude with the acceptance of the opening offer, believing they could have done better through the concession process. That's like paranoia. So I own the gold souk. I have a ring there for, I don't know, $500. A tourist comes in, $500 for that ring? Yes, sir, that's the list price. Oh, I'll buy it for that. Now you're thinking, oh, if I had negotiated, I might have been able to get a higher price. Okay? So, it's kind of like buyer's remorse. Good negotiators make an opening offer close to their own target point to leave room for making concessions. So, you always, if you're selling, you come in higher. If you're buying, you always come in lower, leaving yourself room in the middle, in that bargaining zone. Okay? How about reciprocity? Anybody know what that means?
Reciprocity means I do, then you do.
Yeah, well, it's like equal,
Yeah, exactly.
something of value. Reciprocal arrangement. A reciprocity occurs when a major concession of one party is met with a major concession of equal value by the other party. Okay? So, if I'm negotiating, I may make a specific concession, and then from a reciprocity point of view, the other party makes a large concession as well. If I'm in management, I represent a company, I'm negotiating with the union. And I'll give you the perfect example. The union came to us and they said, we want an extra holiday in our next union contract. Okay? Now, what does that cost the company? That costs a paid holiday is going to cost the company 8 hours times the average rate of pay for every employee in the organization. That's a fairly expensive process. What holiday did they want off? This is in a very rural area in the United States. It's kind of crazy, in fact. The union wanted the first day of hunting season as a paid holiday. Okay? So, here's what we did. We said, okay, we'll give you an extra holiday, first day of hunting, as a paid holiday. But if you don't go hunting, you don't get the holiday. It's only for people that are actually hunters. That was the first concession. The other concession was, in exchange for us giving that to you, I'm going to take one of your sick days back, your paid sick days. So that's a reciprocity. Okay? I traded the sick day for the paid holiday hunt, first day of hunting, okay? You see how that works? So the paid sick day I got back was of equal value to the 8 hours paid holiday that I gave away. Not everybody takes sick days, but then not everybody goes hunting. So it was a pretty even match. Okay? That's called reciprocity. Make sense? Then you get down to your final offers. Okay? So if I'm in the Gold Souk and I'm negotiating to buy something, I get down to what's called this, you know, the guy that owns the souk is going to say, okay, this is my best and final offer. That's when you know there's no more negotiating. This is it. It's the same as saying to someone, take it or leave it. That's the best and final offer. So, final offers. Eventually a negotiator wants to convey that there is no further room for movement or concessions, and the current offer is the final offer. All right? Very important. Because, I mean, eventually you got to bring this thing to a close. So, how do I transmit that message to the other opponent? I may say, this is all I can do, or this is as far as I can go, or I can just refuse to make any further concessions. Hey, sorry, but I'm tapped out. I can't give you anything else. I'd have to give it away if I'm going to give you anything else. Or they might say, I tell you what, to close the deal, you're buying a car. To close the deal, I'll give you an extra 6 months of warranty service. So I'm making one last final concession. Okay? That's a final offer. Specifying specifically, this is my last and final offer, or personalize the message. This is very effective in business. Well, I'll tell you what, I talked to the boss, and he told me, you know, we got one last special deal. We'll give you a special discount, but you have to make the deal right now. Anybody ever have that used on them?
Yeah.
That's common. This is where it comes from. That's the final offer. You know, if you close the deal right now, we'll give you an extra 5% off on the television set. Okay? That's the final offer phase. That's how you convey that, hey, you know, negotiation's over. This is it. Okay? Everybody got that? Now, once you make the final offer,